back into A Dead Man's Books. Thanks for joining us again. We're continuing our countdown of our top 5 books from 2024. Last episode we did Long Time No See by Dermot Healy, an Irish book by an Irish author, obviously set in Ireland, and we're continuing the Irish theme from the year as our next book is also set in Ireland, but this one is non-fiction. I often try to go one fiction book, and then after I'm finished with that fiction book, I'll read a non-fiction book. Every now and then I get on these streaks, I guess, where I read fiction in a row or non-fiction in a row, but usually I try to alternate, and these two books, Long Time No See and then Say Nothing, funny enough, are actually the ones that I read consecutively. So I read, obviously, Long Time No See first, and then I read Say Nothing after that, which I mentioned in the last episode. I had this Irish theme. The book that I read after that, funny enough, is the number 3 book on our countdown, and the protagonist from that story also was from Ireland, and it just had this weird Irish feel to the things that I was reading at the time. So allow me to introduce our next book. Our number 4 book from 2024 is by Patrick Radden Keefe, written in 2018. It's about the troubles in Ireland, that time period with the IRA, and the struggle to try to get Northern Ireland to become part of Ireland itself. This book is called Say Nothing. I'd like to read the back cover to you guys just to kind of give you an idea of what the book was about, even though we're about to get into that. It says, in December 1972, Jean McConnville, a 38-year-old mother of 10, was dragged from her Belfast home by masked intruders, her children clinging to her legs. They never saw her again. Her abduction was one of the most notorious episodes of the vicious conflict known as the Troubles. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the IRA was responsible, but in a climate of fear and paranoia, no one would speak of it. In 2003, 5 years after an accord brought an uneasy peace to Northern Ireland, a set of human bones was discovered on a beach. McConnville's children knew it was their mother when they were told a blue safety pin was attached to the dress with so many kids. She had always kept it handy for diapers or ripped clothes. Patrick Radden Keefe's mesmerizing book on the bitter conflict in Northern Ireland and its aftermath uses the McConnville case as a starting point for the tale of a society racked by a violent guerrilla war, a war whose consequences have never been reckoned with. The brutal violence seared not only people like the McConnville children, but also the IRA members embittered by a peace that fell far short of the goal of united Ireland, and left them wondering whether the killings they committed were not justified acts of war, but simple murders. From radical and impetuous IRA terrorists such as Delours Price, who, when she was barely out of her teens, was already planting bombs in London and targeting informers for execution, to the ferocious IRA mastermind known as the Dark, to the spy games and dirty schemes of the British Army, to Gerry Adams, who negotiated the peace but betrayed his hardcore comrades by denying his IRA past, Say Nothing conjures a world of passion, betrayal, vengeance, and anguish. So, as it said on the back cover there, this story is about the troubles, the IRA trying to get Northern Ireland, who is still with the British Empire, and move them into Ireland so that the island of Ireland can be its own independent country as total. I know that Ireland is independent from Great Britain, but they wanted Northern Ireland to be a part of that. And the book does start off with the Jean McConnville disappearance. That's kind of the big thing that they talk about a lot, is the disappeared. And Jean McConnville is really the first one that we're introduced to that become a part of the disappeared. I think that Keefe does a really good job of having a starting point with the McConnville disappearance, and then going through and telling this entire tale of this time period that happened in Great Britain and the British Isles and Ireland that really was very tumultuous, was very turbulent. It was a very turbulent time. And he just goes through and starts basically from the beginning It seems like there was a lot of research that was put into this, which I always appreciate. I know that there's a little bit of disagreement with some of the research, but I thought that this book was really well done. I enjoyed reading it. It was so captivating and so interesting. I think when you think about modern Western society, part of you thinks that something like this could never happen. I'll talk about it a little bit later, but the British government, they downplayed this as a civil war. It was just kind of a political conflict or a disagreement or terrorism. I think is the main thing that they described it as was terrorism. But it definitely was a civil war. There were tactics and generals called in and all kinds of things that involved the British military at a military operation scale. And so it's just, you think about, I guess, sitting here in 2024 on the other side of the world, removed from that conflict. I think sometimes it's easy to think that something like that could never happen, but this was a bloody struggle, and I think that Keefe does a good job of keeping you captivated into it. I just want to kind of start from the beginning and some of my thoughts that I had as I read through the book. The first thing that I thought was interesting was there was a group who wanted to kind of peacefully protest these things, and there was a group that kind of said, hey, this is going to end up probably in a violent manner, and there was a lot of them that thought that violence was the way to go. And you have the birth of the Provos, the IRA splits, and the Provisional IRA, the Provos. They're really the main ones carrying out the violence, the car bombings, the things like that. A lot of these things that we are familiar with during this time period, the Provos have turned to violence. And the story tracks Delours Price and her sister Marian, and then Brenden Hughes and Gerry Adams. Those are like the main four characters, I guess, that Keefe really focuses on during this story. And it was just really interesting. You've got Gerry Adams and Brenden Hughes, who are, I feel like, complete opposites. They're yin and they're yang. Gerry Adams was very cunning. He was very thoughtful. He planned out things, I think, masterfully at times. I think that he was pretty smart, and it always seems like he was just a step ahead of what he needed to do. A lot of times, I think at the end of the book, you realize that Gerry Adams was in this. He was ahead of the curve for himself, things that would push him forward. But then his partner in this was Brenden Hughes, and they were kind of the leaders of the IRA, the Provos. And Gerry Adams was kind of he had the plan. He was trying to get this violent and politically, and Brenden Hughes was the soldier who would carry these things out, and Brenden Hughes was very good at his job. He did get captured a couple times and arrested, but Brenden Hughes and Gerry Adams, they were a formidable pair and a good team for each other with the Provos there. But those two characters, they stay throughout the story. It kind of follows them and Delours and Marian Price. Some notes I have here about the Price sisters. They were both arrested for car bombing murders. This is kind of where the beginning of the story, where we're starting to learn the conflict and understand more of what's going on here. The Price sisters were arrested for car bombing murders, and they decided that they wanted to be moved to a women's prison in Northern Ireland. So they started a hunger strike, which lasted, I think, over 200 days. But I think the big thing that happened during the hunger strikes was that the sisters ended up being force-fed. Their mouths were forced open with calipers. They would pour liquid down these calipers, and this led to, obviously, traumatic stress later in life. I think Marian suffered more from this trauma than Delours did, but these two sisters were force-fed. They were trying to, again, get those rights to be moved to Northern Ireland to a women's prison. And what ended up coming from this was there was some prison reform that happened because of the force feedings, and the force feedings became against the law in Britain. And this is important to note because not long after that, we have another set of hunger strikes. In 1980 and 1981, a group of the Provos were arrested, and they wanted to be treated like political prisoners. They felt like that their cause was a political cause. They wanted to be viewed as political prisoners, which came with certain rights that they were granted in prison. They were able to wear their own clothes. They were able to kind of move about the prison a little bit more freely. They felt like that they were political prisoners. The British government, however, viewed them as terrorists, and they felt like that they were not for a political cause, but they were just trying to cause upheaval through terrorism and violence. I think the argument was made by Margaret Thatcher that the prisoners committed violent crimes and not political ones. I'm assuming that she's meaning that political crimes would be protests, peaceful protests, or maybe some type of uprising in Parliament or something like that. But she pointed to the fact that they had committed violent crimes, and therefore this was terrorism, and therefore they were not political prisoners. But the one that was big is the hunger strikes in 1981, because the hunger strikes in 1980, everyone went on strike together, and they ended up kind of falling out of that strike together eventually. But when they replanned in 1981, they had this idea that they were going to stagger their hunger strikes, and the goal of that was so that if someone died or if someone gave up, well, we would still have these men hunger striking, and that this would be continual. I think really the main thing is if someone died, that we would have this strike still going and the impact would be there. Because if one dies, then another one might die soon after that, and that would put more pressure on the British government. And Bobby Sands was the very first one to go on strike. And Bobby Sands was starving to death, obviously, and he was not force-fed. They refused to force-feed him because of the new laws from the Price sisters, and Bobby Sands ended up dying 66 days later. In the book, Brenden Hughes and Gerry Adams kind of influenced Bobby Sands to continue, and that was something that weighed heavily on Brenden Hughes throughout his life. But Bobby Sands dies 66 days later. He has a massive funeral in Belfast, and Bobby Sands becomes this hero. I was seeing on the internet that his name is attached to street names around the world. There's a mural painted of Bobby Sands. He's just this immortal hero that emerged from these hunger strikes. And the hunger strikes continued. The IRA, they were negotiating with the British government. They were negotiating with Margaret Thatcher directly themselves, and she was just unwilling to budge. There were a few times where they thought that they were very close to getting a deal made, but in the end it was just never what they were looking for. They wanted this political status. They wanted to be viewed as political prisoners. They were trying to get more of what they needed to pull Northern Ireland back into the fold with the entire island of Ireland. And the hunger strikes continued, and more continued to die. And after a couple more deaths, the families talked to Gerry Adams and asked him to intervene, and he could not reach a negotiation. And they ended up ending the strike on October the 3rd of 1981. I thought that this was one of the pivotal points of the book, of the whole history of the Troubles, because these hunger strikes were kind of their way to protest against the British government in prison, and they were more effective, I think, than the British government wanted them to be, because it did turn public opinion more sympathetic towards the Provos, I think, more sympathetic towards their cause. Margaret Thatcher, on some sense, was viewed by some as strong-willed and a political hero because she didn't give in to the demands of these people. But also there was a lot of people who viewed it as very brutal, very harsh of the government, especially in Ireland. And I think that the hunger strikes are really kind of... The hunger strikes are a big part of this cause. And there's so much in this book that it covers, but this is just one of the things that stood out to me. Just because you had all of the pivotal figures involved in these hunger strikes. The Price sisters were involved in the hunger strikes previously that led to the reform. And then you had, again, Brenden Hughes was in prison with these guys. He was on hunger strike. Gerry Adams was involved in trying to negotiate, and it ended up causing a few deaths. And I think that, again, that weight, that burden of these guys dying in prison kind of sagged on some shoulders later on through life as they became, I guess, on the other side of this, viewing the past of that. But it was just a very pivotal point for their cause, and I just think that the hunger strikes were just a huge part of that. It's one of the things that I remember the most about the book was the hunger strikes, just because of, again, the major players were involved in the hunger strikes. It was really a pivotal time for the Provos and their cause, and it was just a huge part of British history. Gerry Adams is a figure that I was really fascinated with as I read this book. One of my good friends read this book a little bit after, or he started I was towards the end of reading mine, and he had started reading, and I was telling him about Gerry Adams. And Gerry Adams, to me, was very intelligent and very thoughtful and planned out his next moves. I do think that he looked, as you get on towards the book, in the end of the book, you see that his thoughts were, what will preserve me first? What will preserve my cause? But what will preserve me in a light that makes me seem that I am not violent, that I am finding a way to progress forward. And this really ended up in him betraying some of those that he fought alongside, some of these that he planned alongside, and specifically his right-hand man, Brenden Hughes, felt very betrayed by Gerry Adams. Brenden Hughes talked about later in life that he felt like Gerry Adams was not a friend, and he didn't communicate with him anymore. Gerry Adams, out of this, the Sinn Féin political party arose from the Provos, and they were definitely connected, and a lot of people knew that. But in public, Gerry Adams would deny that Sinn Féin was connected to the Provos or the IRA at all. And where the big betrayal came from, especially towards Brenden Hughes, was Gerry Adams ended up denying any role at all with the Provos. He said, I was never a leader with the Provos. I was never a part of the Provos. And obviously, this upset a lot of people that worked very closely with him, including Delours Price herself, because Gerry Adams was pivotal to the Provos and the IRA. He was, like I said, the mastermind behind all of their moves. He was planning things out. He was ordering those to be disappeared, which is executed. That's something that the book talks about, is these people who became what they called disappeared. These people would just vanish and almost without a trace. And what ended up coming up about that was Gerry Adams was ordering these people to be executed. He had a team that would go and capture these people. They would take them across the border and they would execute them and kind of dump their bodies off somewhere. And Gerry Adams was the one kind of pulling the strings on these things. And later for him to kind of come out and say that I was never a part of this, I never had anything to do with this, and he becomes the leader of this political party, and he's kind of, I guess, living this cushy life, and he's in the public eye, and he's seen by a lot of people as this hero, which he would be for those who supported the Provos, but to those who fought alongside with him, it was a betrayal. They did not like Gerry Adams there towards the end. And Sinn Féin is still a political party. They still have candidates running. I don't know how closely their modern ties are to the Provos, but Sinn Féin is definitely still alive in Ireland, and they are still trying to push for Northern Ireland to become independent, or a part of Ireland, I should say, and to have Ireland as one independent island, united. That's the word I'm trying to find. I've been trying to say that all this whole time. They want Ireland united. They want Northern Ireland and Ireland to be united and have a united island. Some more things that I have in my notes here from reading is something I want to talk about that I thought was really interesting and kind of devastating, to be honest, was the Boston College tape situation. We have an author who reached out. He wanted to record and he wanted to study the history of the Troubles, and he reached out to a lot of the members of the Provos, and he was able to record a lot of these audio interviews. He had a man specifically on the inside of the Provos who promised these fellow Provos that, this is just for research, this is just for a college project type thing, research type thing, and this is going to be preserved. This is something that cannot be incriminating. And so they conducted these interviews, and they really told a lot of things and kind of revealed a lot of things. I think that a lot of them viewed this as a chance to get some of these things off their chest and a way to have them out in the open. And so these recordings and these interviews were taped, and they were brought back to America, and Boston College agreed to house them in their archives. They were never really going to see like the light of day until well into the future, when these Provos that were interviewed had passed away. And what ended up happening was the British government caught wind of this, and they wanted to have these interviews so that they could prosecute and have incriminating information on a lot of these players in the Provos. And there was this struggle that was going on because the Boston College had promised, like, hey, we'll never give these up. They're safe here. That was one of the reasons that they took them to Boston College. Boston College, I learned through this, is a university that has a lot of Irish ties, and that may be a little bit ignorant of me, but I never knew that Boston College was so closely tied to the Irish people. I knew that the community, the area around Boston, was very much tied to the Irish and the Irish people. And you read a lot about in the book how some of these Provos escaped to America, and that towards the end there of the Troubles, a lot of the support was actually coming from America, especially financial support. These Irish Americans, some of the immigrants who were living here, some who had been living here for a generation or two, they were more supportive of this Irish cause towards the end than the Irish people were. And so a lot of the financial support was coming from America, from these cities, New York, from Boston, from a few in Chicago, which was really interesting, I thought. A thing that I had read too was kind of like saying how the Irish Americans, they were not really involved in the fight, and they kind of viewed it as it was newsworthy, it was keeping them entertained, and they also wanted to see that some of them still had family over in Ireland. But anyways, Boston College had said that they would protect these tapes, that they would not let them fall into the wrong hands, and they folded pretty quickly. The U.S. government sent some letters, sent some orders over to Boston College, and demanded that these tapes, these interviews, be released to the British government, and they gave those over pretty quickly. And so you had this awkward situation where a man, the informant, I guess, the guy, not the informant, I shouldn't say that. He wasn't an informant. He was just this guy who was in the Provos, and he had connections, and he was trying to help to, I guess, preserve this history. He was trying to preserve the thoughts of his friends, the sacrifices that they felt that they had made, the fight for the cause that they had done, all the bloody acts that they had committed, all the trauma that they had experienced from that. He was trying to make sure that all this was preserved, and he had convinced his fellow provosts that this would not happen, and that ended up happening. And that was just really devastating, to be honest with you. I didn't do enough research, as far as what the laws are to protecting things like that from a university standpoint. I know about the Stanford newspaper case where the police raided the Stanford newspaper to get their anonymous sources, and the Supreme Court protected those in a later case, so your anonymous sources can't be turned over to the police. They can't demand that. They can't demand that these sources be brought to light. And so I'm not really sure how that court case worked in this situation, but I did think it was just very, I don't know, it was upsetting, as someone who's neutral to all of this. I've always had an interest. I think that I've always had a little bit of an interest. Well, not a little bit. I've had a large interest in British culture, which I think is probably a very American thing when you think about it. For some reason, we're very fascinated with England, Scotland, Great Britain, the British Isles, Ireland, all of that. We're just fascinated with that culture. I don't know if it's some type of ancestry that we feel we're connected to or whatever. I don't know, but I've always been interested in British culture. So viewing this, though, I guess neutrally, I thought, just really heartbreaking that this had been documented and this had been turned over so easily and so quickly. I thought that Boston College would put up more of a fight, but when you read the story, they pretty much just turn it over right away, no questions asked. And as you can imagine, this kind of caused some things. There were a few of the provosts who were asked about, are you scared about this now? Are you worried about this will come on to you? And a lot of them had kind of resigned to the fact that they had fought their fight. They were towards the end of their life. They had lived a long, hard, rough life, and they were ready to accept whatever fate came to them. They were just tired of fighting, I think, at the end of the day. That was something that I thought was interesting. I went back and watched a lot of these guys on YouTube. I watched some interviews with Brenden Hughes. I've seen some interviews with Gerry Adams. But especially with these foot soldiers like Brenden Hughes, I think that these guys lived a long, hard, rough life. They fought for something that they believed in so much that they were willing to die for it. They wanted to see Ireland united. They wanted to see it all as one. They felt like that was the rightful place for it. There was a lot of resentment to the British government. And then, of course, there was more resentment to the British government because of the way Margaret Thatcher handled the situation. Obviously, a lot of them felt like that they were done very, very badly, very, very poorly. And you just get this feeling when you watch these interviews of these old provosts that, they were ready for they were tired of fighting, I think is what I'm trying to get at. They were very tired of fighting, and you could kind of read that in some of these interviews that you read in the book. I do want to talk, too, about Delours Price. I've not really talked about her too much, but she's one of the main characters of the story. Delours was active throughout her entire life. Like I talked about, she was a part of the very first hunger strikes, her and her sister, to try to get some of those rights that they felt that they needed to be moved to the women's prison. They were trying to get more of that political prisoner status, things like that. Delours and her sister were part of the team that would capture those who became disappeared, and Delours was one that would drive them to the destination to where they would eventually be executed. And that was kind of her part. She was the driver. She took a part of the operation in that manner, and a lot of times I think she knew what was going on. Some things about Delours Price, though, toward the end of the book, to be honest, kind of annoyed me. She ends up getting arrested in 2001, and she's married to this British theater actor, and she was arrested and then was released, and she was on house arrest, and they told her she could stay She fought to be freer. She wanted to be able to roam about Ireland freely, and the British government ended up granting that for her. So Delours was able to roam about Ireland as freely as she wanted to. And I don't know, again, I'm neutral to all of this, so if you are someone listening to this and you have strong feelings one way or the other, I'm just kind of telling, like I said, from a neutral standpoint, I felt like the British government probably were very lenient in giving Delours this chance to roam freely about Ireland, and Delours ended up getting caught in England because she would go to England, sneak over to London with her husband. They had a house in London, like a flat, an apartment type thing there, and they would go over there when he was performing, and they lived in London for some time. But Delours, to me, at the end of the book, Delours talked a lot about how she had suffered so much trauma and how no one really understood how messed up her mental state was, and how much she was impacted by this, and how much that the IRA situation, the troubles, had kind of racked her and just destroyed her mental state again. And to me, I think that there was a little hypocrisy in that, to be honest with you, because she took part in Jean McConnville disappearing. And as I read earlier at the beginning of the podcast, Jean McConnville had 10 children. She was a single mother living with 10 children. And she was living in Divis Flats, and she was like one of the very few Protestant families that were in Divis Flats, and she was working obviously with the British government. It came out, which was a little bit of a surprise, I think, to everyone, the family, the children included. They had thought that she had been disappeared by the provost. They couldn't really prove it. But anyways, these 10 children are dispersed throughout Ireland and the British Isles, and they go into orphanages. Some of them are split up. They have some that live together in a foster home or an orphanage, and then they were split up as well. And really, when you look at the trauma that one event caused on that family, is very, very heartbreaking. And they suffered their entire lives, this group of children, because of what happened to their mom. There was a set of twins, and they went to an orphanage, and one of the twins was molested at the children's home by some of the adults that were running the home. And as you can imagine, that created a lot of trauma and traumatic stress for him throughout his life. There was just a lot of things like that, a lot of stories that took place amongst these children because of their mom being captured and killed by the IRA. And so for me to hear Delours, she talked a little bit about how no one had pity on her later in life, how no one understood how she had been impacted by all this. I did come away with kind of like a little bit of hypocrisy there. And that's probably a little harsh, but like I said, that's just from me as a neutral reading this. I felt like that the Jean McConnville was, I don't know, it seemed to me that she was kind of like more of a, not as a dangerous threat as some of these other people that they targeted. And this just absolutely destroyed the McConnville kids again. Brenden Hughes was someone else who suffered a lot. And there's an interview on YouTube where you can go and watch that. And you can just tell that Brenden Hughes is just exhausted. You can tell that he had put every bit of his life into fighting for this cause, and he was just completely exhausted by the end of it. And it is understandable to see Brenden Hughes feel so betrayed by Gerry Adams, because when you watch this YouTube interview, which is not necessarily related to the book, it's just related to it that someone interviewed Brenden Hughes. When I watched the interview with Brenden Hughes, and again, he looks so tired and exhausted and old, and feeble. And you could tell that this was someone who, looked like they had gone through decades of war. And then you go and watch Gerry Adams leading Sinn Féin, speaking at funerals, things of that nature. And Gerry Adams seems, he's old, but he seems so young and strong. They talk a lot about how his talking style was very influential, and then you hear his voice and hear him talk on these videos, and you understand that this was someone that could probably easily get people to follow him. So you can understand how Brenden Hughes felt betrayed. It is a very, I think, shocking contrast if you watch the two back to back. But it's understandable that these people felt so exhausted and tired. They fought hard to have a united Ireland. And I think there is some nobility in feeling so strongly towards a cause, whether wrong or right. I don't have an opinion on it. Like I said, I am neutral. I'm living here in America, and I don't have enough information, and I don't live in Ireland, I guess, really to present an opinion on the matter. I just know that this is something that these two groups of people feel passionately about. There's a side that feels passionately about a united Ireland, and then you have those in Northern Ireland who choose to be a part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain. I don't know how Brexit has affected some of that. I don't know how easily they can pass through the border now. I know that was something that I had read when Brexit was happening. That could be something that affected just the free travel between the two countries, because Ireland is a part of the EU and Great Britain is not. And so that there would probably have to be more stricter movements across the border. I don't really know how that's carried out, and I don't know how that's affected the thought processes of those who sided with the British government. But it's definitely something that was interesting to read about. A few things, I'm going to give a few more thoughts, and then I want to kind of wrap this thing up. Something that was downplayed a lot by the British government was that this was not a civil war. They talked a lot about how this was just an operation. We've got these terrorists, this uprising, and this is just an operation. This is not a military operation. We're just using our military to kind of help out there and to kind of put this down. And obviously this lasted for decades. But it was very much a civil war. There were military leaders, there were military strategists. They were making strategy based off of military things. There were medals awarded. This was a civil war, no doubt about it. And I think that the provos wanted it to be viewed that way, and the British government downplayed it, probably because of that reason, because it might give them more legitimacy to their cause. But it was definitely a civil war. I just thought that I don't know, you just think about, again, just modern Western society, and it's just kind of crazy to think about, especially in Great Britain, Ireland. It's just kind of crazy to think about these things going on, just because I think that whether we want to admit it or not, or whether they want to admit it or not, we're so closely related, America and the British people and the Irish people. And I think that, you think about that happening in America, and it's, and we have all the political things going on here now, but it's just so crazy to think that it would get to that level of, car bombings and the military spying on their own and assassinating their own and trying to assassinate their own. And I just think that I don't know. It's just kind of crazy to think that took place, and there's still those struggles today. But there's no doubt in my mind that this was considered a civil war by most, and should be, I think. Okay, so this book was in the top 5. It was number 4. And I just want to talk a little bit why I put this in my top 5 really quickly. This book was captivating. It was so interesting to read these stories. It was so interesting to see the passion behind the movement, the passion to see that these people were willing to go to these extents to get what they felt like they deserved, what they felt like they rightfully should have, and that, again, was a united Ireland. there's so much of a struggle in this, a human struggle, a human factor to this. There's a lot of trust and mistrust. Even inside the Provos themselves, they had trust issues. They had people that would turncoat. They had people that were informants for the British government. And these people were dealt with, as you can imagine, they became disappeared. But it was just very interesting and captivating. And the fact that this, on top of everything, was a true story again, was just so interesting to read and tragic, obviously. It just kept me interested the entire time. And I don't know if it was because I came off the heels of reading Long Time No See. I was in, again, my Irish stretch. I was in this country again and reading about real people and real struggles, and I enjoyed it. It kept me captivated and interesting, and I thought that it was really well done. I have a background in journalism, so I appreciated the research that was done in this, and I really enjoyed I just thought it was really well presented. I think that when you do nonfiction, there are ways that some authors go about it and they make it feel, let's be honest, they make it feel boring. They make it feel textbookish. And this did not really feel like that. You know, you've got some of my favorites like Eric Larson and David Grann who do a tremendous job of presenting things kind of like a novel in a sense. And I thought that Keefe was right up there with them. He was extensive. He was thorough in his presentation. I didn't feel like there were many details that were left out. It was just really interesting to read. I felt like I learned a lot. Again, I have no say on the matter because I am not Irish. I do not live in Ireland. My ancestors are actually from Switzerland, so the Troubles were not something that my family is like tied to or anything like that. But from a neutral observer, from someone who is interested in foreign culture, someone who is interested in world history, it was good to read, and I enjoyed it. And there are other books out there, especially about the negotiations between Margaret Thatcher and the IRA to end the hunger strikes, to end this conflict, that I've got on my reading list that I'm hoping to read soon. So whenever that comes out, or whenever I read that, we'll update that obviously, and we'll talk about those and kind of how it compares to this. But I just really enjoyed reading Say Nothing. Again, it was tragic and heartbreaking, but it was just something that was, I think, really valuable to read. I've not watched the show yet. It's out on FX. It's on Hulu, which, kids, whenever you listen to this, I don't even know if Hulu will be a thing, but if you're listening to it present day, you can stream Say Nothing, the TV show, on Hulu. I've not gotten a chance to watch it yet. I've been wanting to. I honestly am just not really someone who can binge TV. I enjoy reading over watching TV, and so if the opportunity comes to me to sit down and have some time for myself, I always will choose to pick up whatever I'm reading as opposed to watching TV. I don't know. I'm not saying that to make it sound like I'm really cool, because I think I miss out on a lot of fun conversations and cool things between people and amongst my friends. But I just for some reason choose to read over watching the show. But I'm hoping that I can find some time to sit down and really watch Say Nothing and get into it. After you read a book, and I enjoyed it so much, I am really interested to see how they present it on the TV side of things. So let's talk about the rating. I gave this on the Goodreads scale of 1 to 5 stars. I gave this a 5-star rating. I think on the Goodreads thing, if you hover your mouse over the 5th star, it says it was amazing, and I did think that this book was amazing. I think that there's some controversy with Keefe's research. I think from what I'd read, there were some people who felt like that he had left some things out or misrepresented things, and that he had picked and choosed a few things to include and some things that could have been vital to not include. But overall, I felt like that this was really well done. It was really well presented. It kept me captivated. It was 5 stars for me. It was amazing. I enjoyed it. I recommended it to everyone that I saw, especially those that I knew who read nonfiction. And if you read nonfiction and you've not read Say Nothing, I highly encourage you to pick it up. I picked this up at McKay's. I talked about this last week on the last episode. I picked this up at McKay's for $4. It was a book that would always stand out to me. I would walk into the true crime nonfiction section there that they have at the Nashville McKay's, and I noticed this book every single time that I walked past it, and I would pick it up and I would hold it, and I don't know, I just would put it back up. I don't know if I had too many books at the time. I had exceeded budget, but I would always go back to Nashville to the McKay's there, and when we would walk around, I, for some reason, knew that this book was there. And when you look at the cover, it's an iconic photo of Delours Price where she's got most of her face covered and all you can see are her eyes. And those eyes kept calling out to me and they were saying, "Read me." They were saying, "Read me now." And so I finally bought the book, and man, I'm glad that I did. This is another McKay's treasure. $4 for one of my favorite books that I've ever read. You can't beat that. So if you're in the Nashville area, go to McKay's, and I think that they still have one. I bought this book last year. I'm sure that they still have copies. It was one of those that there were a lot of, and so I'm sure you can find it. But if you live near McKay's or used bookstore, go to it. If you go online, I'll link in the description of the show. I'll link the link to Amazon and Abe Books. I try to give both options there. All right, and then lastly, on my own scale, from 1 to 20, my ridiculous scale, because I'm psychotic, I've rated Say Nothing an 18 out of 20. I think that it was phenomenal. It wasn't a perfect book, but like I said, it had a lot of the things that I enjoyed. It had good storytelling, especially with my nonfiction. It had good storytelling. It had good research. It was presented in a way that was not boring. It kept me interested, and that earned it an 18 out of 20, which again leads to 5 stars on Goodreads. Thanks for listening again this week. Next week, I'll be joined by one of my great friends, Jason Crockett. He's going to talk to me about our number 3 book from 2024. It's by my favorite author, John Ely from North Carolina. The book is called The Landbreakers, and I can't wait for that episode to come out. I can't wait for kids, for you to hear this conversation I get to have with Jason. We talk books a lot. We read a lot together, and I'm just really glad that I'm able to do this with him. And so I'm excited for you guys to hear that. Kids, I'm excited for you to hear that as well. And until then, I hope you guys come back and visit. Thanks for listening.